Hey everybody, welcome to Flutter Atlanta. Thank you for coming, to everybody that's here today. I just want to remind you guys before we get started that the mics that we're using for the live stream are in the ceiling and they can hear everything you say, even if you whisper. So don't say anything you would regret to have on the internet. My name is Emmett Dean. I'm a manager of engineering here at Black Airplane, specifically over our Flutter team. I have a background in native Android and iOS development, and I've been using Flutter for a little over 3 years now. We've published over 12 different Flutter apps and have several more in progress, and I love Flutter so much that I also use it for my own startup. I want to give a quick thank you to Black Airplane for letting us use this awesome space, and also for the pizza and beer. Black Airplane is a leading development agency in the Southeast, and we have a special team of people here that can produce pretty much anything. So if you ever have trouble building stuff and want to get some help, come reach out to Black Airplane and we can help guide you. So today we're going to be talking about how to integrate a third-party SDK, and I've kind of split this talk up into two different sections. We're going to start with the simple section, and then we'll get into the more advanced section towards the end, which is also some of the special sauce of what makes Flutter such a good framework and so valuable. So first we're going to talk about is pub.dev. So pub.dev facilitates the sharing via publication of Dart packages. So it's basically a central service that allows you to find all of different types of packages that you've probably seen before, which are kind of like third-party SDKs that are already built for you. And all you have to do is import them into your project, and then you can start using them right away. So how you use a pub.dev package is all you have to do is add it to your pubspec.yaml, follow any platform setup instructions provided by the package, and then you can just start calling it in your code and it'll work right away. So what is a pubspec.yaml? Every Flutter project includes a pubspec.yaml file, often referred to as the pubspec. A basic pubspec is generated when you create a new Flutter project, and it's located at the top of the project tree and contains metadata about the project that the Dart and Flutter tooling needs to know. The pubspec is written in YAML, which is a human-readable, but be aware of the white space because that matters in this programming language. The pubspec YAML defines things like dependencies, fonts, assets, and pretty much anything to make your Flutter app run. So that's basically, this is basically Flutter's version of NPM or their kind of package manager. So here's a super simple example of a pub.dev package called shared preferences. You might use this if you want to securely store basic data types on in a mobile app. And all you have to do is include this in your pubspec YAML, and then you can start using it right away. Pub.dev has all kinds of different packages on it, and you can really search for anything. And if you're just trying to get some inspiration, it's also worth looking through the Flutter favorites and the most popular packages, because this might inspire your next big idea. Pretty much any Flutter app you see is going to use tons of these packages. There's no sense in rebuilding something that's already built, and they're all have really great documentation here that shows you examples of what they do and exactly how to use them once you import them into your project. So that's the most basic version of using a third-party SDK. You just add it to your pubspec YAML and start calling it. The more interesting section is going to be, what if there's something that's not already on pub.dev? Well, first you should double check, because there's going to be about 24,000 packages on pub.dev, and there's very few things that haven't already been implemented. But if there isn't one, don't worry, we can build one. So integrating a native SDK with Flutter is going to be the biggest jump in this case. Of course, you could write out any kind of Dart-specific code without having to do any extra learning, but perhaps you need to work with a card reader or an RFID reader or a very specific piece of hardware that maybe isn't supported by a pub.dev package yet. To do that, Flutter uses a very flexible system that allows you to call platform-specific code in the native language. So you can use Kotlin or Java for Android, Swift or Objective-C for iOS, C++ on Windows, Objective-C on macOS, and C on Linux. And not listed here, but you can also call JavaScript code on web if you need it. The way to choose this is through something called method channels. So on the client side, a method channel enables sending messages that corresponds to method calls. On the platform side, a method channel on Android, and a Flutter method channel on iOS enables receiving method calls and sending back a result. These classes allow you to develop a platform plugin with very little boilerplate code. And this is something that's very special to Flutter. This allows you with very little code to be able to just import native SDKs that aren't supported or call platform-specific code very quickly and easily while you don't even know on the Flutter side. So a lot of the packages that you're using on pub.dev are built like this on top of the native code, and you just get the very nice end-user experience of one-liners and Flutter code to actually call and utilize these SDKs. So here's an example of a method that we built here for a client at Black Airplane. We specifically needed to use a Stripe terminal card reader. So Stripe doesn't have on the roadmap yet support for their terminal card readers publicly for Flutter, but our client really wanted to use Stripe and we really wanted to make that possible for them with the card readers. So all we did was we built our own third-party plugin for them. So through that, as you can see on the left, this is your actual Flutter code. So we had a nice little wrapper method for invoke method, and then it's a one-liner of just calling invoke method with the parameters that we wanted to pass. And on the right there is the Swift implementation of it. So most of the code that we wrote was literally just call the exact same method for the SDK. So we wrote a very lightweight wrapper that only took a couple of days to basically support all of the different functions in the Stripe terminal card reader, and we were able to use that on both Android and iOS apps successfully with their Stripe account. So it's actually extremely simple to build out these third-party SDKs that aren't on pub.dev yet. You will need to know a little bit of Swift or Kotlin, but don't worry, this is pretty much all you're going to be writing. It's just enough to call the method that somebody else likely has built. There's also some code generation options. So one that Flutter recommends themselves is called Pigeon, and keeping everything organized and structured while building out these integrations is extremely important. So on the left here, just like we saw another pub.dev package, it tells you all about the supported platforms, runtime requirements, and also the usage. So if you've used other code generation, which we've talked about here before, it's as simple as adding a couple of indicators via these @ symbols, and then running this command that's going to automatically generate these files. So in this case, you add a couple symbols to your Dart class here at the top, and it's automatically going to generate all of this code for either Objective-C, Swift, Java, Kotlin, and all you have to do in that method stub is then implement your logic. So it actually handles the organization for you, and it just allows you to just do the logic implementation. So why is this important for Flutter? You've probably heard people say that you can do anything in Flutter and that you could do natively, but maybe you didn't know how it worked. Method channels allow us to directly call platform-specific code from our Flutter apps, giving us the ability to do anything that a native application could. If you want to try a full example yourself, Flutter actually provides an awesome step-by-step guide for doing platform-specific code through a very simple process to check your battery level. So I can share this link out on the meetup if you guys want to dig into this more. But other than that, that is how you integrate a third-party SDK. Thank you guys for coming. Next time we're going to be talking more in depth about preparing your app for the App Store. We're going to be talking about all you have to do with Android and iOS code signing, and then we'll also include some talks about CI/CD to help automate the process. Do you guys have any questions?
And Mike has.
What? You're darn right I do. So can you bring up a project that you've got that you can illustrate how this whole thing looks like, you know, kind of touch the YAML a bit?
Yeah. So let me go to this up really quickly. So this was actually our Flutter Stripe terminal integration. So here's just basically our Dart file, which is going to list out all of the various different methods that we had to implement, searching for readers, connecting to readers, collecting payments, etc., etc., etc. We did not use Pigeon on this. If we were going to redo it, we probably would use Pigeon. Digging into some of the code here, classes, you're going to have basically a channel handler, which you register at the startup of the app. And this is basically where that string that you're passing into the invoke method, if I say set connection token, then it's going to go call this method that we have implemented here. Yeah. So that's how it's actually going from that magical string that you're just passing into running code that's written in Swift or Kotlin.
Okay.
There's also the event handler, which the way that the Stripe terminal SDK was built out, there was several situations where you had to listen and then pass back data asynchronously. So this is basically done through a stream that you're able to just listen on the Flutter side, which you've probably interacted with before, and you're able to just pass in these update statuses asynchronously and listen to it on the Flutter side.
Okay. Can you bring up the pub spec YAML?
Yep. So for this one, so here are some of the dependencies that we used here, some things to just help translation. We really love using freezed and JSON annotation. That does a lot of code generation for us that helps do things like check equality, be able to obviously convert things to JSON and back and forth to classes easily. So those are some of the pub.dev package that we used here. To actually get the terminal SDK and everything into this project, there was some extra setup that you had to do through this pod spec. So you pretty much have to include the native SDKs in this pod spec, so that way it's included in the plugin itself if somebody were to add this plugin to their pubspec.yaml. Yep. So the way we built this out was fully intentioned. If we wanted to publish it on pub.dev one day, you could. And we just imported this project into our client's project.
Yeah, there's a lot of cross dependencies between CocoaPods and the other library you got going for pub.dev, that type of stuff. So, all right, cool.
Is there like a Stack Overflow for Dart?
Yep. Yeah, Stack Overflow has a pretty big Flutter community in general. So whether it's Dart or Flutter, you can just search for a tag, and there will be tons of bountied, answered.
Oh, right on. Cool.
So you wrote that SDK in Swift. So does that mean that it's specifically for iOS, or is it still? Does it still deploy cross-platform?
If you are going to be implementing or basically hooking up a native SDK to your Flutter app, you will have to write this kind of wrapper for every platform you want to use it on. So we also did it for Android. So we have Kotlin files for that, very similar. So here's the channel handler version for Kotlin and the all the implementation here. Most of this logic is just formatting. So like for the search readers, we just call discover readers with the, basically what was passed. And then pretty much any of the logic here is just formatting it in a way that we can nicely hand it back to our Flutter wrapper to ingest. Randall says there's 200 plus messages per day on Stack Overflow tagged with Dart or Flutter.
Nice. Thanks, Randall.
Any other questions?
If someone ran into this situation where they're like, shoot, it's not on pub.dev or Stack Overflow or anything like that, and they don't have any experience in Swift or Kotlin, you did. Where should they start? I feel like it's such a mountain.
Ben actually didn't have any, Ben who wrote a lot of this didn't have any experience in Swift or Kotlin before this. I think he may have taken the very brief couple sections of a Swift and Kotlin course when we set out to do this. And, you know, it's when you write so much code, it's not going to be that big of a jump for you. So, and the amount of code that you're actually writing natively in Swift and Kotlin is so small. It's not like you're doing some super complex logic in it. So you're probably going to be able to get away with just the very basics of knowing Swift and Kotlin.
Do you say how long did it take him?
Only a couple days, really. There was a lot of time for us where this was probably the first instance where we really had to build something like this, because 90% of things are already built out for you. So we did just proof of concepts to show that we could do it before we went and actually built out this whole thing.
What are like the biggest mistakes or the biggest obstacles when doing something like this?
We probably would have rather used Pigeon versus how we did it ourselves. It's still fairly well organized, but it seems like Pigeon is going to be kind of a more standard way of doing this going forward. They even recommended themselves here. It allows you to do the type safety and everything like that when interacting with your platform specific code. So it just comes with a lot of benefits to use it that way. It's going to be a little bit cleaner. But yeah, I would not shy away from implementing something like this. It seems daunting, but once you do it once, then you'll realize that it's not too big of a lift. Well, again, next time we'll be talking about preparing for the App Store. If you want to see anything specific for that, just let us know and we'll make sure to include it in the presentation. Otherwise, thank you to everybody that tuned in online.
Tell people if we're going to start building out the content calendar for next year. So if there's a topic that you really want to hear about that we have not covered, please send us a comment in the meetup channel. Just post it on the discussion board and we'll make sure we cover it.
Yep.